Indiana's deer firearm season started on the 12th of November this year. Well before daybreak, we headed out to the blinds to start the day's hunt. John headed over to Misery Condo, where he had shot a fairly decent sized doe the year before. Matt headed to the platform blind, and I headed on over to the south bench in the new pallet blind that we had just assembled recently. The morning started off with freezing rain. This turned into sleet, and a little bit later turned into snow. I saw a few does throughout the morning, as well as occasionally seeing a lone fawn. However, did not see any bucks. Matt saw a young 8-pointer, but held up on the shot since it was rather small. John connected with an 8 shortly after 8 o'clock in the morning. Matt and I waited a couple hours, then headed back to the barn to pick up the pups and help John recover his deer. I believe this is the same 8-pointer that's been up by the barn and hanging around with the 9-pointer in the northeast woods. We got back up to the barn and tried to get a weight on this one before we dressed him out, but the cord snapped and we had to make arrangements to restringing. Matt replaced the old weathered Venetian blind cord that had snapped with a portion of a ratchet strap so that we could get a weight on this one. He was a bit shy of 200 pounds before we dressed him out. In the past, as a surgeon, I usually took care of field dressing the deer after we had shot them. I'm rather quick with a knife and know the anatomy, so field dressing a deer goes pretty rapidly. I had decided last year to have Matt go ahead and field dress the buck that he shot, and this year I was going to make sure that John had an opportunity to go ahead and field dress this deer. I wanted to make sure that he'd be able to do things fairly proficiently, but through a rather small incision that was not carried up into the chest. And that made it a little bit more difficult for him. However, he did a pretty good job. As you can see, John's shot took out both atria and the top of the ventricle. A good heart shot. After we let the blood drain overnight, we went ahead and loaded the buck up to take to the processor the next day after the morning hunt during lunchtime. Monday morning, Matt was in the platform blind and managed to connect with a 50-yard shot over into the north platform field. I packed up and headed on over while he waited for me. Matt unloaded his weapon and secured it before we went ahead and took a stroll on down towards the locust tree to see the deer that he had connected with. The deer only went about 10 feet or so, and it looked like it was a nice double lung shot that may have been a little bit high, and the ballistics probably caused a bit of spinal shock, which dropped him right there in his tracks. After we were able to get a good look at him, we were able to confirm that this was the same 9-pointer that we'd been seeing over in the northeast woods and down by Misery Condo on the trail cameras. We decided to go ahead and take the deer on back to the barn where we'd see if we could get a weight on him and go ahead and field dress him with the convenience of the hoist. Matt had taken the Ranger Crew and I had the Ranger XP. We went ahead and got him loaded in the Crew, and I followed as we went on back down from the power lines, down the hill and across the creek and up through the hayfield to finally get to the road to head on back to the barn. Kimber and Raven were rather excited once we got the deer on back to the barn. They usually will get a little bit rambunctious once we get ready to unload and get the deer up onto the hoist. The weight on this 9-pointer was less than 200 and really close to the same weight as John's buck. Again, I decided to go ahead and keep my hands off of things, and we went ahead and let Matt go ahead and wield the knife to get things all dressed out. He did a pretty good job and was a little bit more proficient than he had been before, identifying the anatomy in the chest by feel. Once Matt delivered the lungs and liver, you can see that he took out both lungs right at the top aspect. We went ahead and let him hang with his head down overnight. That way we'd be able to get as much blood drained out of the body cavity before we headed to the processor the next day. Once we got to the processor, Matt went ahead and filled out the forms to select what types of cuts of meat that we wanted, as well as the summer sausage and snack sticks options that they had. Once he got him tagged, he went ahead and trimmed off the hoofs and got a specific dressed weight on the deer before putting it in the cooler. Our processor already had quite a bit of venison in the cooler when we made our drop off. We did, however, have our meat back fairly quickly and in the freezer within a couple days. Although I zeroed out during firearms season, we have a couple weeks of muzzleloading season going, and I think there's a few candidates out there.